Fruska Gora Camp 2015. Yes, that works. And how are we doing with translation system? Yeah, it's going to work. It's all working. Everybody's a happy camper. Right. Nama Om Vishnuvadaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Vishesha Shunyavani Paschatya Deshatani Achakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhye Vaja Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishavano Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I'm happy to be back here at Fruska Goranga, and I'm happy to see all of you, and thank you for coming together. I think we're going to have to work on the background sound system. I don't know how successful we'll be, but yeah, if we can tone down the peripheral kata, that will help. I was thinking to suggest that we all move more this way, but I know those of you sitting in chairs are probably not supposed to put chairs on these mats, so what to do?
They are already on mats.
Oh, they're on mats. Would that be too radical a request? I just kind of feel like everyone's so spread out. And as they say in America, I don't bite. Yes, much better, thank you. What do you think? Is this better? Okay. So, what are we talking about? My general topic is Krishna Lila. And specifically, I want to focus on Krishna Lila beginning with or following the killing of Kamsa. We were doing this already, how many years ago? 4? Maybe 4. Something like 4 years ago. And help me remember what we discussed. We discussed the killing of Kamsa. I know, that was a long time ago. I discussed the marriage, at least the meeting of Krishna and Rukmini. And we discussed also the Shamantaka Lila, which is 2 chapters in the Bhagavatam. So we jumped around a little bit, and we're probably going to be doing that again this time. And what I have in mind is that we do this with the idea to produce something out of it. This is what we did 4 years ago. We produced, some of you, with your help, we produced a little book. And the book was called Krishna Smarana, with a subtitle that I never remember. And when I say we, what I mean is that several of us contributed, not immediately during the seminars, but most of us later. We produced some, I'm a little hesitant to use the word, but in the West you would call it creative writing, with the idea of doing something like what the artists who are painting pictures of Krishna Lila are doing. What do the artists who paint pictures of Krishna Lila do? Well, in order to translate what we read in the Bhagavatam into a visual image requires, dare I say, some imagination. Imagination is a little bit of a word that's we're very cautious to use in our culture, but I would argue that there is very much a place for imagination. Imagination can be understood as an emphasis on images, on seeing, but it can include other forms. There's the especially audio dimension of experience. So we produced this little book called Krishna Smarana, and then a year later, I think it was, we produced another book it was called Rama Smarana, and that book was bigger than the first one, Krishna Smarana. It was maybe twice as many contributions. And then it was, I think, a 2-year break, 2-year gap, and then came out a book called Gora Smarana. Some of you have seen these books. Anyone has seen some of you? Yes, I know Radha Govinda is. He's a book collector. And we have an idea to produce another volume. And the next volume, the theme, you may say, well, there's Krishna, there's Rama, there's Goranga, who's left? So the idea we want to focus on is, again, Krishna, but we're making a little more of a specification. Krishna and his opponents. I use the word opponent, not enemy, because sometimes Krishna's devotees place themselves in a position of being an opponent, but they're not demons. Obvious examples, Lord Indra and Govardhan Lila, Lord Brahma and Brahma Vimohan Lila. So there's a kind of opposition there, Krishna versus someone else. But this term, opponent, is inclusive. That means it includes such opponents who are actually devotees. And it also includes demons, who, for the most part, turn out to be also devotees. So, we'll talk more about this, but just to prime you a little, just to give you a little idea. And don't be worried, we're not going to put anyone on the spot about this, but I'm hoping that it will inspire some of you, maybe even all of you, to write something. Now, maybe one further reassurance, you may say, well, you're producing this book in English. I'm sorry, I can't write in English. I write in Fruska. What is it? Jezik? No, that's Polish. Jezik. That's okay. If you want to write in your own language, that's very good. And we will find someone who can then translate into English. Okay? So that's just a little bit in the background. We'll possibly bring up this subject now and then some more. But I wanted to mention that in the very beginning. And then to sort of warm us up, I thought instead of jumping into Krishna Lila, it will be good, it will be helpful for us to get in the mood of hearing about Krishna Lila through a song from Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Now, as it happens, we don't have copies of the song, and we also don't have a projector. You may know this song to some extent, but perhaps not so well. But what I thought we can do well, I have an idea. Let's do this sort of as if we were chanting mantras like Bhagavatam class in the morning. Okay? But to do this, you're going to have to listen carefully, and we'll see how this goes. This is not Sanskrit. This is Bangla Bhasha. Which we take as a kind of sacred language. Why? Why would we consider Bangla as a sacred language?
Lord Chaitanya spoke.
Yes, because Lord Chaitanya spoke Bangla, and because Krishnadas Kaviraj wrote his biography of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Bangla Bhasha. And yes, it's a very sweet language. The song that I thought we can go through together it starts with the line Shuddha Bhakata Charanayanu Bhajana Anukula. And this is a song which you can find within a collection of songs that Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote apparently around 1893, this would have been about 3 years before our Srila Prabhupada appeared. At a time when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was establishing Nam Hatta groups all over Bengal. It's said that he established some 500 such groups within a 2 or 3 year period. 2 years, I think it was. Very active. And for these groups, he thought, well, I need to teach them philosophy. And they're not going to understand Sanskrit, and there are not so many books that are going to help to understand Krishna consciousness. Well, I'll just have to do it myself. And so, but he didn't write prose, he wrote poetry, he wrote songs. And so in these songs, he's teaching. These are very didactic songs. Didaktichke. And they're quite systematic. In particular, in this songbook, Sharanagati, he's taking the traditional teaching about the process of Sharanagati, which has 6 components, 6 parts. Anukulyasya sankalpa, pratikulyasya varjanam, rachishya titi vishvaso, bhoktritve varanam tatam, atmanikshepa karpanye, sadvidha sharanagati. There are 6 components, beginning with accepting what is favorable for devotional service and avoiding, rejecting what is not favorable for devotional service. You're familiar with this, I think. Yeah. So, since you're familiar, what are the remaining 4 elements of Sharanagati? Yes, Parameshwari.
To become humble.
Yes. Yes.
Then to completely depend on Vishnu's and on Krishna.
Okay.
And then to have faith in his protection.
Protection. Very good.
And not to have any separate desire and intention.
Okay, very good. Yes. The last one you mentioned, Atman Ikshepa, literally throwing oneself down. In other words, giving oneself completely to the Lord. Very good. Now, what's interesting in one thing, it's interesting, Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sharanagati songbook is he takes each one of these 6 principles and he elaborates them with several songs, sometimes 4 songs, sometimes as many as 8 different songs. And each one of these songs is a progression to deeper and deeper understanding of each of these principles. Another thing that's interesting is that he reverses the order of the Sanskrit verse that I just quoted. He almost completely inverts it, so that instead of starting with what's favorable for devotion service, he starts with humility, daimya. And I think he's making a point by doing that. What could that point possibly be? To show us that surrender begins with humility. And what sort of humility? That he illustrates. How does he illustrate it? First of all, he makes a confession. He says, basically, I've been wasting my life, and now here I am at the fag end of my life, we say in English. You know that expression? Fag end of life. And now I'm understanding what a mistake I made, so now I surrender to you. So in this way, he elaborates and he speaks about himself. Well, the song that we want to sing, we are jumping forward through Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sharanagati songbook to the section called, I forget what he calls it in Bengali, but it's Anukulyasya Sankalpa. It's accepting what is favorable for devotional service. And what he's doing in this particular song, this is song number 3 of 4 songs on this subject, is he's listing different activities which he personally finds favorable, which he finds not just favorable, but inspiring. He's telling how wonderful it is. Spiritual life is fun. All right, the first verse, I'll first read the translation. Dust from the lotus feet of pure devotees is conducive to devotional service, while service to the Vaishnavas is itself the supreme perfection, as well as the root of the tender creeper of divine love. Now, one technical point I want to make is, in the Bengali, it often happens that Bhaktivinoda Thakur will insert a syllable. There's a technical term for it, which I don't remember. He's doing this so that what's called scansion, the number of syllables to make a line, will be correct for the purpose of singing. And one word that he does this with is the word bhakta. And so, instead of bhakta, it becomes bhakata. Bhakata. He often also does this with his own name. The what's called signature line, which is typical of bhakti poetry, not just Bengali, but Indian bhakti poetry. It's coming almost at the end or at the very end of the song when the author will identify him or herself. It's called the Vanita. And Bhaktivinoda will often say, Bhakati Vinod. Bhakati Vinoda Ashray. Okay, so here we have Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu Bhajana Anukula Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu Bhajana Anukula. Maybe that's too much in one gulp. Shuddha Bhakata Charana Renu Bhajana Anukula Bhakata Seva Parama Siddhi Prema Latikara Mula. What means mula? Root, yes. So Prema Latikara Mula. What would that mean?
The root of the creeper of devotion.
Radha Govinda is always fast. Like that?
But such a fun.
He is such a fun. Yes. Okay. Madhava Titi Bhakti Janani Jotane Palana Kori Krishna Vasati Vasati Boli Parama Adare Boli. Okay, Madhava Titi. Anyone other than Radha Govinda? Yes. Yes, yes. Titi means day, and Madhava means Madhava. So days of Madhava. So any festival days, such as Ekadashi, they are Bhakti Janani. Janani, anyone know?
Mother.
Mother, yes. So the mother of devotion, yes. And then Krishna Vasati Boli. Parama Adari Boli. As my dwelling place, I choose with the greatest reverence and love the transcendental abode of Sri Krishna. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is making a choice. He's saying, I'm going to be where Krishna has his pastimes. Krishna was. This is another addition of a syllable. So where Krishna lives, that's where I want to live. Basically, he's saying like that. Okay. Gor Amar Jeshavastane Koralo Brahmana Range Sheshavastana Haribo Ami Pranayi Bhakata Shange. All those places where my Lord Gora Sundara traveled for pastimes, I will visit in the company of loving devotees. Of course, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is living in Bengal. He had an advantage over us. He was living right there in the place where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was having his pastime. But he spent quite a lot of effort to get himself in his work stationed near to Navadvip. He was in Calcutta, he was in different places being sent by the government for his work. And he always wanted to get to Navadvip. And finally he did. And then that's when he had this house built in Goranga. Mridanga Vadya Shunite Mono Avashara Sada Jache Avasara Sada Jache Gora Vihita Kirtana Shuni Anande Hridaya Nache Mridanga Vadya, sound of Mridanga. Shunite Mana, hearing, yes. Abhasara Sadajache Gora Mihita Kirtan Shuni Anande Hridaya Nache. Anande Hridaya Nache. Something dancing? What's dancing? Yes, the heart is dancing in what mood? Blissful. In ekstase. Yes. Okay. Jugala Murti. Dakya Mora. Parama Ananda Hoy. Prasada Seva. Korite Hoy. Shakala Prapancha Joy. Jugala Murti. What means Jugala? Yes, Yugala means two, or double. So the double Murti, Radha and Krishna. Dakya, more. Seeing, yes. Parama Ananda Hoy. Yeah, Hoy means happens. Haya. Sometimes it'll be transliterated H, A, Upsilon, Ha, A, Upsilon, A. And devotees typically pronounce Haya. No. It's Hoy. Hoy. If the last A is pronounced at all, it'll be very light. Prasad Seva. Brilliant. Korite Hoy means doing, making the seva, the service of prasad. Shakala Prapancha Joya. Prapancha means material existence. Pancha means five. And prapancha means taking the five elements, the five basic elements, mix them all together, you get material world. That's prapancha. So Shakala Prapancha Jaya, I gain victory over the whole material existence by this. Jedina Grihe Bhajana Deki Grihete Goloka Bhai Charana Sidhu Dakiya Ganga Shukana Sima Pai. Goloka Vrindavan appears in my home whenever I see the worship service of Lord Hari taking place there. When I see the Ganga, that river of nectar emanating from the lotus feet of the Lord, my happiness knows no bounds. The word sima means boundary. It's not the same as singa. Singa means lion. Sima. In Bengali, sima. Shuka nashima pai. There's no limit to the sukha, to the happiness I feel. Okay, verse number 7. Tulasi deki Judaya pran Madhava toshani jani Gora priya Shaka shevane Jivana sartakamani. Okay, Tulasi deki. Seeing Tulasi, yes. Now, if you read these songs, you'll often see a little apostrophe after some words. What's the Serbian for apostrophe? Apostrophe. So you'll see a little apostrophe after certain words. And usually this is substituting, this is kind of the opposite of what I mentioned before, where there's an adding of a syllable, bhakata, instead of bhakta. In this case, it's taking away a syllable so that it all adds up, so that it scans. And usually the syllable that's being taken away is upsilon long a, ya. So it would be tulasi dakiya, Judaya prana. And it has a certain grammatical purpose, which I won't get into. Okay, the sight of the holy tulasi tree soothes my soul, for I know she gives pleasure to Lord Madhava. By tasting the green leafy preparation named shak, a great favorite of Lord Goranga's, I consider life worthwhile. I like that expression. Life becomes worthwhile when one tastes the shak that has been offered to the Lord, which Lord Chaitanya likes. So whenever you feel that, what is the purpose of life? What is the point? Just find yourself some spinach. And one nice thing about spinach is you can prepare it very quickly. You just wash it, cut it a little, throw it in a pot with water, and in 5 minutes it's ready to offer, right? And so then you offer it, and you invite at least one other devotee, because one shouldn't just eat alone. One shouldn't cook and offer and eat alone if possible. That's boring. Then suddenly, and while you're doing all this, you can remember Bhaktivinoda Thakur's experience. He says that when he tastes this shak, he finds Jivana Sartakamani, Sa-artaka, making sense, having meaning. Jivana, his life has meaning. So you will find, you can make an experiment. Okay, the last verse. Bhakti Vinod, Krishna Bhajane, Anukula Payajaha, Pratidivase, Paramashuke, Shikara Korayetaha. Whatever Bhaktivinoda obtains that is favorable service of Sri Krishna, he accepts every day with the greatest joy. He says, Prati Divase, every day. So this again is a lesson. It's Bhaktivinoda Thakur teaching about the practice of bhakti, and specifically accepting doing what is favorable for devotion service. He has, I won't go into it so much, but he has interesting songs about pratikula, varjana, rejection of what is not favorable. And as I mentioned, one thing he does, he from one song to the next, he is going deeper into the subject. So in this topic of pratikula, rejecting what is not favorable, I believe it's the third song in which he says, I avoid the association of the Mayavadis. And then he goes on about how they are worse than materialists. The materialists gross materialists, it says, are not as bad as Mayavadis. I stay away from the Mayavadis. And then in the last song, he describes a situation in Vrindavan in which he is with the gopis, and he is avoiding like anything any connection with Chandravali. He says, I'll have nothing to do with Chandravali and her camp. They have the wrong mood, so I stay away from them. Well, these are eternal associates of Krishna, and they are being avoided, says Bhaktivinoda Thakur. And I think this is interesting in light of, or in the context of our experience. Sometimes, I know it's rare, but sometimes there will be some apparent friction or conflict between devotees. I know that doesn't happen here in Serbia, but I know of other places where I have seen this happen. And sometimes devotees get quite distressed about this, understandably. But I think it is valuable to remember that there's politics in the spiritual world. You may think, finally we'll go back home, back to Godhead. No politics. Sorry. So get used to it. Also, a little footnote to this, it's mentioned in Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion. He's describing different sorts of friends of Krishna. And there's one group of friends, there's, I believe, a technical name for them, and it's explained by Rupa Goswami that these friends are very argumentative. What's the Serbian word for argumentative? Svadliv. Yeah, it sounds kind of argumentative. So, there's a certain group of friends of Krishna who are argumentative, and it says Krishna enjoys their arguing. Isn't that nice? Krishna can enjoy so many things. He can even enjoy devotees arguing with each other. Okay, that's another subject. So, accepting what is favorable for devotional service, Bhaktivinoda Thakur does not mention this in this particular song, but in another of the Anukula songs, that hearing Krishna's pastimes is favorable. So that's what we want to do, is hear about Krishna's pastimes. And I want to say that I consider this something which is a process which I am learning. I am in the process of learning to appreciate and let's say to know Krishna's pastimes. A little point which I think is relevant. In a few days I'm going to be going to Radhadesh, where already started is a course. It's called the Kirtan course. It goes on for 8 weeks, and it's quite a rigorous course. We have, I believe, 18 students there. Satchidananda Swami has just been there giving talks but they also have regular lessons with music teachers who are very qualified, and then other visiting teachers are coming. So I've been asked to also come and speak for a few days, and my topic is a super broad overview of Indian music, because I feel that it's just good for musicians to be aware of what there is out there. There's within the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, but there's also so much more. And of course, there are different classical traditions. So I was doing a bit of research because one of the reasons that I chose this topic was because I don't know anything about it. You may say, well, that doesn't sound very promising. You're right, it's not. This became an impetus for me to learn something. And so I'm in that process also. One of the things that I learned was that the really accomplished musicians in the classical music traditions, there's basically two major divisions, North Indian, South Indian, or Hindustani and Carnatic. And in both cases, as you probably are aware, the system of following a particular raga is very essential. And then there are so many different ragas, which you can think of as sort of constellations of notes. It's not exactly a scale, it's a constellation of notes. What am I getting at? My point is that I found it extremely interesting that the really expert musicians, the really accomplished musicians, they learn 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 ragas, and that's it. They just learn. They're realizing these ragas, and that's why they're so highly regarded. They spend a lifetime learning and realizing 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 ragas. And it seems to me that we can appreciate this idea in relation to Krishna Lila. On the one side, Krishna Lila is infinite. It is also eternal, and therefore it's ongoing. And of course that means it's going on right now as we speak. And it's going on, by the way, on 2 levels. One is called prakarta, and the other is called aprakarta. Prakarta means manifest, and aprakarta means not manifest. Aprakarta is going on where? Aprakarta. Wrong. Aprakarta is going on. Try again. There's one other option.
Material.
No, he said material. Spiritual. Yes. Goloka Vrindavan. That's the Aprakarta Lila, or Aprakat, we would say in Bengali or Hindi. And then Prakarta Lila is going on in the material world, in the world of perception. And you may then ask, but hold on, I thought it's Prakata. Where is it? I don't see it. Prakata Lila is happening in this world. And I just said that it's eternal. So where is it? Okay, Vrindavan, and where else? Huh?
The sun universe.
Somewhere, yeah, some universe, it's going on. As soon as Krishna finishes one episode, one Lila in his pastime, that episode moves, Krishna moves, that becomes visible in another universe. As the sun is moving, that is, as the earth is turning, or maybe it's the sun that's moving, there is a constant shift of the edge, the line of what is light and what is dark. So similarly, Krishna's pastimes are going on. So, what was my point? Yes, Krishna's pastimes, being eternal, are going on as we speak. And so one can speak of them as without beginning and without end. And so what does it mean to say this Lila versus that Lila versus another Lila? But we do that because Krishna's pastimes work like episodes, isn't it? Krishna's, okay, what's a pastime of Krishna in Vrindavan? That's, okay, Kaliya Damana, the punishing of Kaliya. So that's a distinct pastime. We have a sense that it has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. So when I'm speaking of getting to know and getting to realize one of Krishna's Leelas, that's what I mean. But at the same time, continuing with that point, could it be the case that by really, with a capital R, comprehending, realizing one of Krishna's pastimes, we can comprehend all the rest? Could that be the case? Possible. Yes. And so, now when we're reading or hearing Krishna Lila, 10th Canto Bhagavatam, the Krishna book, as Srila Prabhupada composed, we may sometimes feel, well, I like this pastime more than that one, or we might feel we can relate to one more than to another. That's all right, because they're all Krishna's pastimes. They're all giving us opportunity to be attracted to Krishna. And what does Krishna say in the Gita about relation with him? Ye yatamam prapadyante tam sitaiva vajamyaham. As they approach me, I reciprocate with them. So if we feel more open to one pastime than to another, that's fine. But it could also be the case that one pastime that doesn't feel that we can relate to so much may open up at a different time. It may have to do with our own lives. In the course of our lives, we each have so many different sorts of experience. And that's why we can go on hearing and reading Krishna's pastimes, and we can always get a little something more from each one as we hear again and again. And what I'm suggesting, bringing back to the subject of doing some writing, it has been said by one of the ancient writers of the Latin world, there is no better way to engage the mind than by writing. Because to write forces you to think, what is it that I am putting on this paper or in this computer? Okay. Oh, it's already 6:00. We're hardly getting started. And what I wanted to do now, before going into Krishna Lila, I keep doing things before getting into Krishna. Kind of sounds like I'm stalling, doesn't it? It's like, okay, when's he going to get started? I want to look at 3 pastimes that have to do with water. And let's see, some notes here. The first is Gajendra, the attack on Gajendra. The next is Ramachandra, bringing the ocean to submission. And the third is the churning of the milk ocean. And I'm not going to, I'm not much of a storyteller, I have to confess. I'm more of a story summarizer, perhaps. And maybe something of an analyzer, if you like. But you may ask, why do you want to put these 3 together? I want to put these 3 together because these 3 have been put together by one king in South India several centuries ago. And the evidence of this is not something that he wrote, but rather something that he had built. He had a temple built, and the temple is called the Vaikuntha Perumal Temple. And that temple is still there. It is in Kanchipuram. It's not one of the bigger temples. It's kind of a modest-sized temple. But it's a Bhagavatam in 3 dimensions, because it has relief images of pastimes from the Bhagavatam. And one scholar did a study of this temple over a 25-year period, and he concluded that indeed it is all about the Bhagavatam. It is a Bhagavatam in 3 dimensions, and it's telling a very interesting story. In addition to all of the pastimes, it's telling a story about becoming Krishna conscious. And it's telling a story about how the king who commissioned the temple becomes Krishna conscious by the guidance of his acharya. Well, that's a big story, but on the northeast side of this square temple in the corner is the story of Gajendra being saved by Vishnu, by Narayana. As you may know, Gajendra had been cursed in his previous life when he was King Indradyumna. And there may be more than one Indradyumna. Indradyumna is a somewhat generic name for a powerful king. He was cursed by Agastya, and the reason he was cursed is that Agastya had been ignored by King Indradyumna. Does this sound a little familiar? A king ignores a sage. Durvasa, Parikshit, who else? What about Indra and... not Indra and Krishna, Indra and his guru. Who's his guru? Brihaspati, yes. Brihaspati comes in, Indra is completely distracted and he ignores him, and this is the beginning of a great catastrophe for Indra. Similarly, this was experienced by King Indradyumna, and the result was that he became cursed to be an elephant. Then we come to his life as an elephant. And what is he doing? He's doing what elephants are likely to do. He's wandering with his consorts, we might say, his mates. Apparently he has several of them. And they are in a garden, the garden of Ritumat. Ritu means season, and Ritumat means in season. And so it's very suggestive of sexual activity. And while he is there, while he is in this body of water, he's attacked. He's attacked by a grasper. The word graha, Sanskrit word, means crocodile, and graha literally means to grasp, grasping. Grasp. What is the Serbian word? Yes. Zgrabit. Sounds exactly like it is. Zgrabit. Well, they struggle for a long time. What is it? 1,000 years, something like that. And Gajendra is losing his power. Why? Because he's in the wrong place. He's in the water, and the water is the place where crocodiles are very powerful. And he realizes that he's losing, and so he does a wonderful thing for an elephant, something that most elephants don't do. He calls out, he prays. How is it that he can pray? Because he can remember from his previous life prayers which he had learned. And he prays to Bhagavan. Now, there's a bit of a problem here, praying to Bhagavan. In India today, if you just refer to God as Bhagavan, then many Indians will say, yes, there's Shiva Bhagavan, there's, in the Bhagavatam, there's Narada Bhagavan. Some will say there's Sai Baba Bhagavan. There are many Bhagavans. And all the demigods are also referred to as Bhagavan, possessive of great power, Bhagavan. And so they're hearing Gajendra calling, Bhagavan, help. And they all think, Bhagavan, which one does he want? Anyway, somebody will take care of him. So of course, Narayan understands that he's the one being called for because he's the one who is the actual Bhagavan. And so he rushes on Garuda to save Gajendra. And how does he do this? He invokes his Sudarshan Chakra and he takes the crocodile and he makes him into something like a loaf of bread. You take a loaf of bread, you want to slice off a slice, and just line it up in front of you and slice, like slicing off the heel of the bread. So this is, of course, the end of the crocodile, who had been also cursed. In his previous life, he had been none other than Hu. And Hu was the foremost of Gandharvas. And he had been cursed by one other sage, Deva, for some impropriety. Okay, here's the point that I want to make. It has been argued by some, and I think it's an interesting argument, which may be helpful for appreciating this pastime is that the lake of Ritumat can be seen in a symbolic way as representing the Annamoya Kosha of the Pancha Kosha divisions of the living entity. Some of you may be familiar with this. There's Annamaya. These are sometimes called sheaths, layers of consciousness. And going from the outside to the inside, it starts with consciousness of food. And where do we see consciousness of food? Most especially evident in the course of a human being's life. Yes, small children, babies, they're sucking everything. Give them your finger, they'll take it, they want to put it in their mouth. Everything is for eating. They see the world in terms of anna, in terms of food. So, food consciousness. This lake can be seen as identifiable with food consciousness. And in this situation of food consciousness, what happens? What happens is that erotic desires arise, and a husband and wife will unite, and as a result of their uniting, there will be children, and as a result of this, they become entangled in material existence. Now, Sankarshana is a form of the Lord. Now, I know this may start to sound a little complicated, but let's see if we can follow this. Sankarshana is a form of the Lord. The name Sankarshana, you could translate as the plower. Plow, to plow, is to take a device and plow the earth. Karshana means to draw, Sankarshana. And of course, Sankarshana is Balaram, and what is one of the items that he holds, that he carries? A plow. Yeah. He's also called this, it's explained by the acharyas, because he is drawn by Rohini at the time of his birth, or before his birth, from the womb of Devaki to the womb of Rohini. Rohini? Yes. Now, Sankarshana facilitates two things. One is he facilitates the absorption in desire, which brings about entanglement for those who wish to have such experience. And simultaneously, he facilitates, or simultaneously with others, he facilitates becoming free from the absorption in material existence. Okay? So, in this scheme, Gajendra's mokshana, his liberation by Narayana, Sankarshana, can be seen as a first step, representing the first step of a devotee's making spiritual progress. And this is understood in a ritual way, that at the time of initiation, and we're referring here to a tradition in South India, the Sri Vaishnava tradition, in particular Pancharatrika literature, at the time of what we might call first initiation, the disciple makes a plea. He pleads with the Guru, the Acharya, in the way that Gajendra pleaded for Lord Narayana to appear and save him. So this is a kind of first initiation, is represented by this pastime. Isn't that cool? I thought it's kind of cool. I think we're just going till 6:30 to give a little time for a break. So what I'll do now is just mention briefly, and we can continue this tomorrow. I don't know what time tomorrow. We'll see what the schedule will be. Possibly the same time, maybe then again not the same time. So I suppose we'll find out. But this is going to develop with the pastime of Ramachandra going to the ocean and threatening the ocean. In effect, taming the ocean, allowing or facilitating the possibility of crossing the ocean. And how is he going to cross the ocean? With the help of the monkeys. Now, sometimes we compare the mind to a monkey. What if you had, as Ramachandra had, thousands of monkeys? What if your mind was not one monkey, but 1,000 monkeys? Does it sometimes feel like the mind is not one, but 1,000 monkeys? I see some of you nodding. Well, Ramachandra, first taming the ocean, which is which here is representing the ego-centered mentality. This is now on the level of pranamaya kosha. Taming the ocean, then he engages the mind monkeys in building a bridge, building a causeway across the ocean. So they are monkeys, but they are now tamed, they're controlled, they're brought under control to do something useful. And of course what they're doing is facilitating for Lord Ramachandra to face Ravana, to defeat him in battle, and to recover Sita. The aim of devotees is always to reunite, to bring Lakshmi together with Narayana, Sita together with Rama, Radha together with Krishna. So that's described there. And then the churning of the milk ocean, we'll leave that for briefly discussing tomorrow. I think I will stop here. Now you may wonder what pastimes in Krishna Lila we will discuss. And I think I want to leave that a little in suspense. Just as I said, in general, we want to talk about Krishna's pastimes out of Vrindavan. After Krishna leaves Vrindavan, he goes to Mathura and he kills Kamsa. And so we will proceed from there. Does anyone have a burning question or comment about anything we've discussed? We've sort of jumped about a bit. We talked about Sharanagati, we talked about favorable activities in devotional service, including the eating of shocking shock. And we talked about Krishna's pastimes being eternal, and we talked about them being unlimited, and we talked about them being something like ragas. And and we talked about Gajendra, and we talked about the sheaths, the panchakosha, sheaths of consciousness. That's described, by the way, in the Upanishads, particularly, as I remember, in the Taittiriya Upanishad, what is considered one of the earlier Upanishads. Yeah, okay. No burning questions, comments. Maharaj, any words of wisdom?
Thinking about, we often hear the phrase dust of the lotus feet of the Vaishnavas.
Yes.
And I'm not quite sure what this dust refers to.
Yes.
I heard this question before several times. You know,
Why dust?
I can give myself all kinds of answers, but do you have some
definitive
answer? Some definitive answer?
I don't know that I have a definitive answer, but I can say how I understand it, for what that's worth. So, on a normal sort of physical level, we understand that feet that go walking here and there, they collect dust. And the feet of how to put this? One of the quickest way to offend someone is to inadvertently touch that person with your feet or with your foot. And one of the very first things that a small child learns in traditional Indian culture is to control the feet, to not put the feet where they don't belong. Why? Because they are the lowest part of the body. They touch the ground. The ground is dirty. It is impure, and what's collecting on the feet is impure. But in bhakti, everything gets turned upside down. The lowest becomes the highest. And so, when we are relating with a sadhu, with a Vaishnava, then we want to go for the feet, because they're the highest. We wouldn't go to his head. You know, let me touch your head. But they're the highest in that sense also, that it puts us in the position of being below the person that we're approaching. And what happens when you are in the proximity of someone, the dust on their feet could get shaken off onto you. And again, in the normal calculus, you wouldn't want that. Get this dust away, go somewhere else. But in this calculus of bhakti, we want to bathe in that dust. But okay, what is that dust? Well, you can take it as mercy, the mercy of the Vaishnava. We can take it as a service to the Vaishnava, or a combination of both, the mercy of the Vaishnava giving us service. You can also take it as whatever trouble the Vaishnava is bestowing by his or her mercy upon me. Let that trouble come to me. Because that trouble, in fact, there's a song in which Bhaktivinoda Thakur speaks about this, not in relation to foot dust, but happiness and distress in devotional service. He says it's all wonderful. It's all great stuff. So, another thing about dust is that it is transferable. It can rub off, so it's accessible. I may not be able to enter into the mercy of the devotee, but if I could just get a little of something of his association, something that can rub off, something that can inadvertently get blown over to me, then I will be blessed. And that's something in the idea of Sangha also. If I can just, see that devotee from a distance, I would, mentally take the dust. I will be blessed. And if I hear something, so much more benefit I'm getting. So in all cases, the sense of, I would say, accessibility and the possibility of connection with the Vaishnava is there in the idea of dust.
So it's like what is normally considered to be the lowest. If I worship that, then that's an expression of the highest worship.
Yeah.
The highest form of respect.
Yes. Maharaj is saying, if I worship that which is normally considered low, then that becomes the highest form of respect. So that's another related. Yes.
So, Lava Matra is also dust.
Lava Matra, no, that's about time. Yeah, well, it's another way of putting the same thing. Yeah, it's just a moment. Literally, an 11th of a second, a lava is an 11th of a second. The point is, a very short time can also constitute a connection with the Vaishnava. If we are tuned into, if we are open to that connection. Now that doesn't mean, of course, okay, I got my 11th of a second of association, I've really got other things to do. No, that wouldn't be the idea. Yes. Right. I hope that we can see you again tomorrow. And thank you for your kind attention. And I hope you will also all have a wonderful time. You've already started yesterday, isn't it? Some of you have come. I hope we will all have a wonderful, inspiring time in this 2015 Fruska Gora camp. Yes. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Gaur Premanande.